My name is Thomas, and I was just 11 years old in the autumn of 1903 when the world, as I knew it, shattered into a million impossible pieces. Up until that point, my world was a small, quiet village nestled deep in the Scottish Highlands, a place called St. Brigid. It wasn't on any major map, just a cluster of stone cottages huddled together for warmth against the biting winds, with a tiny kirk, a smithy, and a single winding track that eventually led to the nearest market. Town, miles and miles away. We were a forgotten corner of the world, and that suited us just fine. Life in St. Brigid was simple, dictated by the turning of the seasons and the ancient rhythms of the land. My da was a crofter, working our patch of rocky soil, and my ma, bless her tireless hands, spun wool and kept our cottage warm with peat fires. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Enough food on the table, enough stories by the hearth, and the comforting knowledge that everyone in St. Brigid was family, one way or another. All 44 of us. Every single soul. I remember that autumn vividly. The heather on the hillsides was turning a deep, rich purple, and the air carried the crisp scent of wood smoke and damp earth. The harvest had been decent. The sheep were fat. And there was a feeling of quiet contentment in the village. Old man Finley, who claimed to be the oldest man in the Highlands, was carving new spoons by his door. Young Alara was teaching her little brother, Dougal, how to skip stones across the burn. And Mrs. McLeod, with her bright red shawl, was humming a cheerful tune as she hung her laundry out to dry. It was a picture of peace, the kind you see in old storybooks. But there was a subtle undercurrent that started to hum beneath the surface of our quiet lives, like a distant, almost imperceptible tremor. It began with the oddities, small things. That alone might have been dismissed, but together they formed a pattern. Old Hamish, the usually booming blacksmith, grew quieter, his hammer striking with less force. He complained of strange headaches and said the iron in his forge felt wrong somehow, resistant to his touch. Then Mrs. Campbell, known for her sharp eyes, swore she saw figures moving in the mist on the distant moors. Figures that didn't look quite human, too tall, too slender. She was old, of course, and prone to fancy, so people just nodded politely and said nothing. My own experiences were smaller, stranger. I'd be out herding our few sheep, and I'd hear faint music on. The wind like pipes, but not pipes I recognized. It was haunting, ancient, and seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. When I asked Da about it, he just grunted, "It's the wind, lad, playing tricks." But it didn't sound like the wind. It sounded deliberate. Then came the dreams. Everyone in St. Brigid seemed to start having them around the same time. Vivid, unsettling dreams. My ma dreamt of a deep, echoing silence, where even the birds had ceased their singing. My da dreamt of walking through a forest where the trees whispered secrets in a language he couldn't understand. And I dreamt of water. Deep, cold. Water, rising around our cottages, not flooding, but somehow absorbing the light, turning the world dark and still. In my dreams, I could hear voices, muffled, distorted, as if speaking from under the surface. It wasn't scary in the traditional sense, but it left me with a profound sense of emptiness upon waking. The dreams were shared in hushed tones over peat fires and at the well. People tried to laugh them off, to blame the supper, but the shared experience created a new kind of unease. It was as if something was slowly, subtly invading our collective consciousness. Reverend Miller, a kind but somewhat bewildered man, tried to offer sermons on faith and resilience, but even his voice seemed to carry a tremor of doubt. The animals, too, began to act strangely. The dogs in the village would sometimes howl at nothing, their hackles raised, staring intently at the empty hills. Our sheep, usually placid, would cluster together at the edges of the pasture, bleating nervously, as if sensing an unseen predator. One morning, The cattle in the communal field were found bunched tight against the fence, shivering, though the weather wasn't particularly cold. It was another unsettling detail, another stitch in the strange tapestry that was beginning to weave itself around St. Brigid. My best friend was a boy named Alasdair, a year older than me, with a streak of daring that often landed us in trouble. We spent our days exploring the nooks and crannies of the surrounding hills, convinced we'd discover some ancient Pictish treasure, but even Alasdair started to feel it. "The air feels different, Thomas," he'd said one afternoon as we sat, atop a rocky outcrop, looking down at the scattered rooftops of St. Brigid. "Like a storm is coming, but not one you can see or feel on your skin." The final few days before it happened were the strangest. A heavy mist rolled in, thick and persistent, clinging to everything like a damp shroud. It didn't lift with the sun, it just stayed, blurring the edges of our world. The faint, ethereal music I'd heard before seemed to grow louder, more insistent, though still elusive. It was almost melodic, yet utterly alien. A song that pulled at something deep inside, a longing for something unknown. People started staying indoors more, drawn to the flickering comfort of their fires. The usual chatter of the village faded, replaced by a quiet vigilance. We all felt it, that something was building, something vast and unknowable, just beyond the thick veil of the mist. No one spoke of it directly, but the unspoken fear hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was the night of October 23rd, 1903, a date etched forever into the memory of those who remember St. Brigid, that the quiet unease finally erupted into an unimaginable silence. I remember that night because of the storm. Not a wind and rain storm, but a strange atmospheric phenomenon. The mist outside our cottage window was swirling, churning, lit by an eerie, pulsating blue light that seemed to originate from the heart of the village itself. It wasn't bright like lightning, but a soft, hypnotic glow that seeped through the cracks around our window frames. And the music. It was everywhere now, clear and resonant, filling the air with its haunting melody. It felt ancient, beautiful, yet terribly sad. A siren's call that drew at the very core of your being. My ma was huddled by the fire, muttering prayers. My da sat by the window, his face grim, clutching his old hunting rifle, though I knew it was useless against whatever this was. I was tucked into my bed, but sleep was impossible. The blue light intensified, casting strange, dancing shadows on our cottage walls. The music swelled, rising and falling like a vast, invisible tide. It was a lullaby, almost, but one that promised a journey to somewhere far, far away, a place of profound stillness. I felt a strange urge to go outside, to walk into the blue light, to follow the music. It wasn't fear exactly, but a deep, inexplicable pull. "Stay inside, Thomas." My da's voice was rough, strained. "Don't go near the windows." I watched, transfixed, as the blue light pulsed, growing brighter then receding, like a giant, slow heartbeat. The music reached a crescendo, a choir of unseen voices joining the pipes, singing a wordless, captivating song. And then, as suddenly as it had come, it faded. The blue light dimmed, the music softened, becoming a whisper, and then utter silence. The mist outside was still there, thick and white, but the eerie glow was gone. The haunting melody vanished. The silence that followed was profound, absolute. It wasn't the usual quiet of the Highlands night. This was a silence that felt empty, a void where sound should be. Even the distant bleating of sheep, the rustle of the wind, the creak of our old cottage, all were absent. My da lowered his rifle, his face etched with confusion. "What in God's name was that?" he whispered, his voice sounding unnaturally loud in the sudden stillness. We waited, huddled together, through the long hours until dawn. The first light of morning filtered through the mist, gray and indistinct. My Da, after a moment of hesitation, pushed open the cottage door. The mist was still thick, but the blue light was gone. The air felt cold, still. He stepped outside, calling out, "Finley, Alasdair, Mrs. McLeod?" His voice echoed, unnaturally loud, and there was no reply. We walked through the village, my Da in front, me clinging to his hand, our hearts pounding with a terrible premonition. The cottages were there, solid and familiar, but something was terribly, terribly wrong. Doors stood ajar. A pail of water sat by the well, untouched. Mrs. McLeod's laundry still hung on the line, swaying gently in the unseen breeze, but no one was there to take it in. Old man Finley's half-carved spoon lay on his doorstep. The kirk door was open, revealing empty pews. The smithy fire was cold. We walked from cottage to cottage, calling out names, our voices growing increasingly desperate, increasingly strained. But there was no answer, no sign of life, no one. The sheep were still in the pasture, the cattle still in the field, but their owners, their tenders, their families were gone. Every single soul, all 44 residents of St. Brigid, they had vanished overnight. The mist, I realized, hadn't just blanketed the village, it had been a curtain, drawing itself across the stage of our lives, and when it lifted, the actors were gone. It was an impossible, unthinkable act. No footprints in the soft earth, no overturned furniture, no signs of struggle. Just a profound, aching emptiness where laughter and life had been. The morning after, as the gray light slowly pushed back the persistent mist, St. Brigid was a tomb. My Da's desperate calls echoed in the unnatural stillness, swallowed by the empty cottages. Alasdair's home, old Finley's workshop, Mrs. McLeod's laundry still swaying on the line, all silent, all abandoned. It was an impossibility. How could 44 people, men, women, and children, simply vanish into the highland air without a trace? The only explanation that came to mind was something out of the darkest folklore, a tale whispered around peat fires on long winter nights. But this was real. The cold dread that had settled in my stomach was real, and the emptiness of our world was painfully, undeniably real. My ma, usually so strong, crumpled onto the stoop of our cottage, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Da stood over her, his own face a mask of bewildered terror. He was a practical man, a man of the earth, who faced harsh winters and stubborn soil with grim determination. But this defied everything he knew. There were no tracks in the damp ground around the houses, no broken windows, no signs of any struggle, no discarded belongings. It was as if every person had simply stepped out of their lives and ceased to exist. The only sound was the distant bleating of the bewildered sheep and the lowing of the cattle, unaware of the profound absence of their human caretakers. "We have to go, Thomas," Da said, his voice raw, looking out at the silent village. "We have to get to Inverness. We need help." Inverness was the nearest market town, a good 2 days' journey on foot, perhaps more through the boggy autumn moors. It felt like a lifetime away. The thought of leaving St. Brigid, leaving our home, even empty, filled me with a fresh wave of fear. But what else could we do? We were 3 souls in a ghost village, surrounded by an inexplicable void. The decision was made with a grim resolve. We couldn't all go. Ma was too shaken, and someone had to stay with the animals, keep the fire lit, show that someone was still here, still breathing. "I'll go," Da said, tightening his worn boots. "I'll take the pony. It'll be quicker. You two stay here. Don't open the door for anyone but me. Keep the fire burning bright." He packed a small bag with some oatcakes and dried meat, checked his old rifle, more for comfort than for any real defense against the unknown. His farewell was quick. a gruff hug for Ma and a firm clasp on my shoulder. His eyes, though, held, a depth of fear I had never seen before. Then he was gone, a solitary figure disappearing into the persistent mist that still clung to the edges of the village. Ma and I were left alone. The silence in St. Brigid became even heavier, a suffocating blanket. Every creak of the cottage, every gust of wind through the empty chimney sounded unnaturally loud. We spent the day huddled by the fire, Ma murmuring prayers under her breath, her eyes constantly darting towards the door. I tried to read from my old primer, but the words swam before my eyes. My mind was filled with images of Alasdair's empty bed, Ilara's skipping stone lying still by the burn, Mrs. McLeod's clothes drying forever on the line. It was like a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. The village was there, physically, but its soul had been ripped away. The night was endless. We lit every candle we owned, trying to push back the encroaching darkness. The mist outside pressed against the window panes, and I could almost feel its cold, silent breath. I heard the faint, unsettling music again. Not as loud as the night before, but a soft, lingering hum, just on the edge of hearing, like a memory of a sound. It tugged at me, that strange, inexplicable pull, making me want to leave the safety of the cottage and follow it. I clung to Ma, and she held me tight, both of us listening to the silence, waiting for the first sign of dawn or the sound of Da's returning footsteps. It was late on the second day when we heard the unfamiliar rumble of carts and the murmur of distant voices. My heart leaped. Da was back. But as the sounds grew closer, I realized there were too many voices, too many carts. It wasn't just Da. Ma and I peered cautiously through the small window, our breath misting the glass. Out of the swirling mist emerged a procession. Several men in the dark uniforms of the constabulary, 2 or 3 stern-faced soldiers in kilts and tunics, and a few worried-looking men from Inverness, including the town's factor, Mr. Abernathy, a stiff, formal man, known for his ledger books. Da was amongst them, his face haggard, but alive. The sight of them, outsiders, was a strange relief, but also a new kind of terror. Now, others would see the impossible. They would witness the profound emptiness of St. Brigid. Constable McIntyre, from Inverness, a burly man with a thick mustache, was already shouting orders. The soldiers, grim-faced, spread out, methodically checking each cottage. Their shouts echoed through the quiet village, jarring and out of place. Their investigation was as thorough as it was futile. They searched every house, every shed, every patch of land. They questioned Da repeatedly, making him recount the strange events of that final night. They poked and prodded at the empty forge, examined the ungathered laundry, stood bewildered in the silent kirk. But like us, they found nothing. No forced entry, no signs of a struggle, no explanation. It's like they vanished into thin air, I heard Constable McIntyre say to Mr. Abernathy, his voice laced with disbelief. Never seen anything like it. Not a single trace. No tracks, no broken glass, no sign of any struggle. Mr. Abernathy, ever practical, spoke of runaway debtors or a mass migration, but even his voice lacked conviction. The idea of 44 people, including the very old and the very young, silently migrating overnight, defying the very laws of physics, was too absurd to entertain for long. I watched them from a distance, a silent observer. They were looking for evidence of human action, theft, abduction, violence. But what had happened in St. Brigid wasn't human. I knew that. It was something else. I noticed how they avoided looking at the things that weren't evidence. The way the mist still clung in strange, unmoving pockets, the unsettling silence that swallowed their shouts, the odd behavior of the animals. The dogs, instead of barking at the strangers, whimpered and cowered in the corners of their empty kennels. The sheep continued to huddle, their eyes wide and unseeing, as if still witnessing something terrible. One afternoon, while the soldiers were busy prodding the earth around the communal well, I wandered towards Alistair's cottage. His door was ajar just as we'd found it. Inside it was cold, dusty. His small bed was neatly made, a wooden toy soldier perched on his pillow. I picked it up, feeling a pang of longing for my friend. As I turned to leave, something glinted under a loose floorboard near the hearth. It wasn't much, just a small, silver whistle, the kind Alistair always carried. But it was unique. It had a small, intricately carved raven on its side, a gift from his grandfather. I picked it up. It felt cold. Why would Alistair leave his whistle? He never went anywhere without it. As I held it, a faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the metal, and for a fleeting second I heard the whisper of that strange, ethereal music. Just a note, then gone. It was too soft for the adults to hear, too subtle for them to notice. But I heard it, and it seemed to emanate from the whistle itself, or perhaps the memory of what had touched it. I knew then that it wasn't just a dropped toy. It was a fragment of the mystery, a lingering echo of what had occurred. I tucked it into my pocket, another secret only for me. I wouldn't tell the soldiers. They'd just dismiss it. The investigators stayed for days, then weeks. They sent word to Edinburgh, and soon reports of the St. Brigid anomaly started to filter into the newspapers, distant rumblings of an impossible event in a forgotten corner of the Highlands. Journalists came, eager for a sensational story, but they found only bewildered officials and a silent, empty village. They wrote of mass hysteria, unexplained migration, and even divine intervention. But no one truly believed their own words. The truth was too unsettling. The initial urgency of the search eventually faded into a grim acceptance. There was nothing to find. The village remained, a monument to a vanished population. My ma and Da, unable to return to a normal life after witnessing such a horror, decided to stay. Our cottage became the lone inhabited dwelling in a town of ghosts. The sheep and cattle, though still alive, seemed to mourn their missing shepherds. The wind carried not just the scent of peat, but the heavy, unshakable silence of absence. St. Brigid, once a small, vibrant community, was now truly the abandoned village. Its 44 residents had gone overnight, swallowed by something that left no trace, no explanation, only an echoing void. The eerie blue light and the haunting music became stories, whispers of a night when the veil between worlds had thinned. And I, Thomas holding Alistair's cold silver whistle, knew that the mystery was far from over. It was a secret buried deep in the Highlands, and I, a boy who had heard the silent song and felt the strange pull, felt an undeniable, terrifying urge to understand what truly happened in St. Brigid. It was a burden, heavy and cold, that I would carry for the rest of my days. The weeks that followed the departure of the Inverness Constabulary and the curious journalists were the loneliest of my life. St. Brigid became our private prison, a monument to an absence so profound it felt like another inhabitant. My ma and Da, though they tried to maintain a semblance of routine, were haunted. Ma's usual humming by the hearth was replaced by long, vacant stares into the fire, and Da, who once strode through the fields with purpose, now moved with the weary gait of a man carrying an invisible burden. They spoke of the village in hushed tones, as if speaking too loudly might summon back the thing that had taken everyone. For me, the silence was different. It was loud with questions, with memories. Every empty cottage, every untended garden, was a stark reminder of what had been lost. I found myself walking through the village often, a solitary figure in a place that should have been bustling. I'd pass Alastair's cottage and remember his boisterous laughter. I'd walk by the kirk and recall Reverend Miller's gentle voice. The scent of peat smoke, which once meant comfort, now felt like the ghost of fires long dead. And always, I felt the cold, hard lump of Alastair's silver whistle in my pocket, a constant chilling reminder that I was holding a piece of a secret. The strange music, that faint, ethereal hum, never truly left. It was softer now, often just a whisper on the wind, but it was there, just at the edge of hearing, especially when the mist rolled in. It was seductive, almost, weaving itself into my thoughts, making me wonder if it was calling to me, trying to show me something. I remembered the intense pull I had felt that night, the inexplicable desire to walk into the blue light. It still lingered, a faint echo of that powerful urge. I started to notice things that the grown-ups, consumed by their grief and confusion, seemed to miss. The animals, for one. Our sheep, usually so skittish, grew strangely docile, almost listless. They would graze in tight, unmoving clusters, their eyes wide and unfocused. The village dogs, instead of barking or chasing after rabbits, would often sit in silent vigil, staring towards the distant, mist-shrouded moors, whimpering softly. It was as if they saw something we couldn't, or remembered something terrifying. And the mist itself. It was almost always present now, thicker and more pervasive than any mist I had known in the highlands. It clung to the valley, often not lifting even at midday, turning the familiar landscape into a shifting, indistinct dream. It carried that peculiar scent I had noticed before, too, a faint, sweet smell, like damp earth and something else. Something cloying and oddly metallic. It was the smell of the night they vanished, a ghost of a scent that permeated everything. My curiosity, a boy's stubborn need to know, began to overcome my fear. I couldn't accept that everyone was simply gone. There had to be an answer, and I had Alastair's whistle, my secret connection to that night. I started carrying it constantly, running my thumb over the carved raven, feeling the faint, cold tremor it sometimes gave off. One afternoon, when Da was out tending the sheep and Ma was busy spinning, I decided to revisit the places I remembered the villagers being that last evening. I went to the communal well first. The bucket still sat there, half filled with clear, cold water. As I peered into the dark depths, I could almost hear the chatter of the women who gathered there each morning. Then I noticed it, a faint, shimmering ripple on the surface, even though there was no breeze. And for a moment, the strange music seemed to rise from the well itself, a clear, bell-like note. I pulled back, startled, my heart thumping. It was as if the water held a memory of the sound. Next, I went to the smithy. Hamish's tools lay scattered on his workbench, covered in a fine layer of dust. The forge was cold, the bellows still. On a small, grime-covered shelf, I found a collection of old horseshoes, some polished, some rusty. As I ran my hand over them, I felt a faint vibration, and a low, guttural hum, like a distant whisper, seemed to emanate from the cold iron. It was the sound of Hamish's headaches, the wrongness he felt in the metal, echoing in the silence. The raw material of the earth itself seemed to be reacting to whatever had occurred. The most unnerving visit was to the kirk. The wooden door stood open, inviting the mist inside. The air within was damp and still, heavy with the scent of old, wood and something else, something like ozone after a lightning strike. The pews were empty, the altar bare. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that penetrated the stained glass windows. I walked slowly down the aisle, my footsteps echoing loudly. As I reached the front, I noticed that the small brass communion chalice on the altar was lying on its side. It wasn't just tipped over. It looked as if it had been rolled, deliberately. And beneath it, pressed into the dust of the altar, was a faint, almost invisible impression, It was the precise shape of the carved raven from Alastair's whistle. My breath hitched. Alastair had been here. He must have been. And he had used his whistle, perhaps to leave a sign, a clue. But why here? In the kirk? And why had the chalice been moved? I knelt, gently brushing away the dust, but there was nothing else. Just the faint imprint, a silent message from my vanished friend. The coldness of the whistle in my pocket seemed to deepen, and the faint, ethereal music pulsed with a new urgency. It was as if Alastair was trying to tell me something, a final message before he, too, was gone. The events of that night, the blue light, the music, the peculiar sensations, they were not random. They were connected. And Alastair had known something that he tried to convey with his whistle. The ravine with the old standing stones, a place Alastair and I often played, was a good mile beyond the village. Locals rarely went there. It was said to be a place of ancient power, of the old folk, but it was also where the strange music seemed strongest on the wind. Could Alastair have gone there? Could he have left the whistle at the kirk as a sign for me to follow? A terrifying thought took root in my mind. The music, the pull I felt. What if it wasn't just a memory? What if it was still happening, still pulling at those who lingered? What if my family, by staying, was also succumbing to whatever force had claimed the others? I had to find answers, not just for the sake of the vanished, but for us, the living. I had to go to the standing stones. The decision was a terrifying one, but also necessary. I wouldn't tell Ma or Da. They would forbid it. This was my secret, my burden, and my desperate hope. I clutched Alastair's whistle, feeling its cold comfort in my palm. The mist outside was thickening as evening approached, shrouding the hills in an impenetrable white. The perfect cover for a boy on a forbidden journey. The mystery of St. Brigid was calling me, deeper into its chilling heart, towards the ancient, silent stones that stood as sentinels on the moors. I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones that the answers lay there, waiting in the heart of the mist and the echo of that haunting song. I would go to the standing stones and discover what truly happened when 44 souls vanished overnight from the forgotten village of St. Brigid. As dusk bled into the deepest highland night, painting the sky with bruised purples and grays, I slipped out of our cottage. Ma was asleep by the fire, exhausted from another day of quiet grief. Da was still out with the sheep, a solitary silhouette against the vast, empty moor. My heart was a drum against my ribs, but a strange resolve propelled me forward. I clutched Alastair's silver whistle, its coldness a stark contrast to the growing warmth of my determination. The mist was my ally, a thick, swirling cloak that swallowed my footsteps and muffled the sounds of the empty village. The path to the standing stones was barely a path at all, just a deer track that wound its way through clumps of heather and over boggy ground. I'd walked it countless times with Alastair, racing each other, pretending to be ancient warriors. Tonight it felt alien, treacherous. The mist distorted everything, turning familiar rocks into monstrous shapes, and the whisper of the wind through the tall grasses sounded like unseen voices. The air grew colder the further I walked, and that faint, sweet, metallic scent, the ghost of the vanishing night, seemed to thicken around me. As I climbed higher, the ground becoming rockier, the ethereal music grew stronger. It was no longer a whisper, but a clear, melodic hum resonating through the very earth beneath my feet. It was beautiful, enchanting, yet deeply unsettling. It called to something primal within me, a longing that was both comforting and terrifying. I felt that inexplicable pull again, the urge to surrender, to walk towards the sound and let it take me wherever it led. I had to fight it, to remind myself why I was here. Alasdair's whistle, a small anchor in a sea of unknowns, felt colder, vibrating faintly in my hand. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the mist parted slightly, revealing the looming silhouettes of the standing stones. They stood in a rough circle, ancient and weathered, dark against the lighter gray of the swirling mist. I'd always thought them just big rocks, part of the landscape. Tonight, they felt alive, pulsing with an unseen energy. The music was strongest. Here, a continuous, harmonious hum that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. It filled my ears, vibrated in my chest, and oddly quieted the frantic beating of my heart. I stepped cautiously into the circle, my eyes scanning the ground. The grass was flattened in places, as if something heavy had been dragged or many feet had moved across it, but there were no distinct footprints, just vague impressions. The air here was strangely still, almost warm, despite the cold outside, the circle. And the sweet, cloying scent was overwhelming now, like 1,000 wilted flowers and something else, something I couldn't place, something almost metallic, like blood mixed with honey. I walked slowly from stone to stone, my hand still clutching Alasdair's whistle. The whistle felt strangely warm now, buzzing faintly, and then I saw it. Tucked into a crevice in the largest stone, almost hidden by a patch of moss, was a small woven wicker doll. It was crudely made, with rough wool for hair and 2 tiny, black buttons for eyes. I recognized it immediately. Little Alara, Alasdair's younger sister, had made it. She never went anywhere without her wee friend. Why was it here? As I reached for the doll, my fingers brushed against the rough stone, and the music around me swelled, almost deafening. The stone itself seemed to pulse with a low, deep thrum. And for a fleeting moment as I touched it, I saw something. Not with my eyes, but with something deeper. An image flashed in my mind, the blue light, intense and swirling, rising from the center of the circle, and within the light, shadowy figures, elongated and shimmering, moving slowly, deliberately towards the stones. And then, the faces of the villagers, Mrs. MacLeod, Old Finlay, Reverend Miller, Alasdair, Ilara, Dougal, their faces serene, almost tranquil, their eyes wide and unseeing, walking, walking, walking into the light. Not struggling, not screaming, but simply walking, as if drawn by an irresistible force, by the haunting beauty of the music. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving me breathless, gasping for air. I stumbled back, my legs weak, the wicker doll still clutched in my hand. It hadn't been an abduction in the way the constabulary thought. It had been a procession. They hadn't been forced. They had been called. Led away by the light, by the music, by something ancient and unknowable that resided in these very stones. I looked at the wicker doll, then at Alasdair's whistle. Ilara had left her doll here, a child's last possession, and Alasdair, with his ingenious mind, had left his whistle in the kirk, pressed into the altar dust. He had known. He had understood. The whistle, with its faint tremor, the imprint of the raven on the chalice, they were not just clues to his presence, but a warning. The music, the pull. It wasn't just for them. It was for anyone who lingered too long, anyone who paid too much attention. The chilling truth settled over me, heavy and cold as the Highland mist. The 44 residents of St. Brigid hadn't been taken by force, not exactly. They had been lured, entranced, drawn away by a power that resonated from these ancient stones, a power that manifested as the ethereal blue light and the haunting, beautiful music. It was a power that sought to claim, not to destroy. But what did it claim them for? Where had they gone, led by that siren song? And why were my family and I spared? Was it because we were not fully captivated? Or was it because we had not succumbed? To the full embrace of the music, the way the others had? As I stood there, trembling in the circle of the standing stones, the implications began to sink in. This wasn't just a local mystery. This was something ancient, something beyond human comprehension, an old magic that had awoken in the highlands and consumed an entire village. The sense of urgency grew. My parents, still in St. Brigid, were still vulnerable. The music still hummed, the mist still clung. I had stumbled upon the heart of the mystery, and now I had to find a way to break its hold or risk becoming another silent participant in the never-ending procession from the abandoned village of St. Brigid. I had to get back to Ma and Da before the mist and the music truly claimed them too.